Hi there. In today's video, I would like to walk you through the GEX Live table inside the TanukiTrade web application. The GEX Live module has two main segments, the table view and the charting view. In this video, we will focus on the table view and how to actually use it. So the table view shows option positioning metrics for the selected expiration and underlying tickers. At the center of the table, there is the net GEX column, which represents the net gamma exposure of the underlying for that specific expiration. Around it, you will find additional customizable columns that we will later on talk about. Let's start by selecting a ticker. You can either type directly in the search field, for example here, or you can just start typing, for example, Apple, and it will come up as it would do on TradingView charting application. So going back to SPX, you can select the expiration here, and you see the options metrics and net gamma exposure for the selected expiration and the selected underlying ticker. This table refreshes every single minute. So here you will see the expirations of the selected ticker. And if you unselect the key only, it will show you all the available expiration in the option chain. If you click on key only, it will only show you the main ones. For example, the 0DT, the 1 weekly, the 2nd weekly, the 3rd weekly, 4th weekly, and the monthly and the rest. And you will also see the every expiry. Where you see all, this shows you every expiry, which is more than 2000 days to expiration. So it will sum up all the metrics for that expiration if there is a cumulative view selected. Talking about cumulative versus standalone GEX aggregation. We have two calculation methods in the whole web application. We have cumulative GEX and standalone GEX. Cumulative GEX aggregates all earlier expirations up to the selected date. The standalone GEX includes only that specific expiration. So for example, if you were to see the February 20th expiration and the default is the cumulative, it will aggregate all previous expirations, data, metrics, net GEX, and the others into that one specific data. If you click on standalone, you will only see the standalone data, and you can see there is a significant change in terms of the GEX in other metrics if you only want to see the standalone one. Usually by default, it's advisable to use the cumulative GEX for most analytical purposes because that aggregates all the previous expirations and data. So let's talk about the additional columns in here. You will see different metrics that you can select in 3 different columns, here, here, and here. These are absolutely customizable based on the user experience and subjective needs. And we also introduced some of the presets that someone might use, for example, default 0DTE, or these are just layout settings. You can change any of them anytime. And if you select any of the metrics in here and you come back to the web application, it will be saved in your browser where you used it before, previously. So let's talk about the metrics. Before selecting any specific column, it's important to understand that not all metrics describe the same information. Some metrics represent existing positioning, others represent current trading activity like the volume. Understanding the difference between positioning and flow is critical when you want to interpret options data. So first of all, let's talk about the net DEX. What is net DEX? Net DEX stands for the net data exposure. It's a directional bias embedded in positioning. It does not mean that if you see very high call DEX that the market will go up or very high put DEX that the market will go down. It's not an instant directional indicator. It's just a directional positioning of the current marketplace, but it's not a directional bias. It's not a signal. So for example, if we are looking at the net DEX, you will see here that there is a high net DEX at 7,000 on the put side. This is a negative net DEX. It doesn't mean that the market will go up or down to that strike. So it's not like a specific signal or a specific signal indicator. It's just the current positioning of that specific strike for that specific expiration. If you see a red bar in here, it means that the put data exposure is higher than the call data exposure because net DEX is the net of the data exposure. So you will always see either a red bar or a green bar. If you see a green bar, that's also true for GEX. If you see a green bar, the call gamma exposure is higher than the put gamma exposure, and you see the net gamma exposure. So once again, these bars does not predict direction, but it helps you identify where directional pressure may exist. Let's talk about the net OE. Net OE reflects the existing positioning rather than current trading activity. The green indicates call-dominated positioning, red indicates put-dominated positioning. Think of open interest as commitment, where traders are already positioned. So for example, on SPX 7100, there's a high call open interest for that specific expiration. It doesn't mean that the market will go there. It just means that the market participants are betting more on the call side, on the upside, than on the downside. But here, for example, you see a 6900, a very significant one. It also doesn't mean that the market will go to 6900. It just means the positioning is there. There is a delta exposure at that current level. Now let's talk about the detailed open interest that shows both call and put open interest separately. This is useful because net values can hide structure. For example, a strong call and a strong put positioning may cancel each other out in a net view. So for example, at the strike 7000, there is a very high bar for call open interest and also put open interest that might cancel each other in the net view. But here you can see them separately if you want to see that view. And the other open interest metric we have is absolute OE that tells you where the highest call and put open interests are. And obviously at this 7000, this is a pretty significant level in here in SPX right now. Moving on, you can also see the absolute GEX, which focuses on the magnitude of gamma exposure regardless of the direction. And this is also not surprising that there is a high absolute GEX at 7000 right now. This is useful for identifying areas where the dealer hedging activity may be the strongest. These levels often act as volatility anchors, but again, these are not directional indicators. These are just current market sentiment and current market positioning that might change in an instant. Okay, so that's very important to understand that if you see high GEX bars in here, it doesn't mean that the market will go there. It's just the current positioning. But it can mean that if the market goes there, there might be a reaction. We have also written a couple of articles on Medium where we explain the mechanics and how the gamma exposure and reaction zones work. So if you are new to this topic, please go to Medium and look for TanukiTrade publications, and you will see there very important and useful articles about GEX, DEX, and the other metrics that we are applying in the Webapp. Now let's move on to net volume. The net volume shifts focus from the positioning to activity. It shows whether recent trading flow is call dominated or put dominated. Unlike open interest, volume reflects what is happening now. The volume represents the flow and open interest represents the positioning. And you also need to understand a very specific and important difference between open interest and volume. Open interest is a data which only refreshes once a day when the market opens. So you don't see open interest change during the day, but volume changes every single tick or every single minute. So this table shows you data updated every single minute, but open interest, these columns are not changing during the day because open interest is only updated by the clearinghouse once the trading day starts. So if you don't see open interest change during the day, that's not an error, that's not a bug, that's a feature. I mean, net open interest does not change during the trading day. And detailed open interest also does not change. Any of the open interest metrics are not changing during the trading day, only once when the trading day starts. But volume, if you want to see what the activity is in the market, volume changes every single minute because this table view changes or updates every single minute. So that's a different metric than open interest. And finally, let's talk about GEX by volume. GEX by volume is a little bit a strange metric because here we multiply the volume with the gamma. It's a very different metric than the open interest multiplied by the gamma because volume is not positioning. It's there because it's an industry standard measurement. So if you want to use it, you can. But I personally does not follow GEX by volume. I would rather look at the net GEX or the other metrics that we talked about. Now let's talk about the horizontal lines in here and what do they represent. We have different lines called core resistance, HVR, which stands for high volatility level, core transition, put transition zones, and put support. These are names that we come up with. So it's very important to understand when we talk about core resistance, it does not mean that it's a technical resistance. So if you see a core resistance, don't assume a directional assumption based on the name itself, because if the market approaches 7,050 and we name it the biggest net GEX bar as core resistance, it does not mean that the market will stop there and the market might reject the price. It doesn't mean that. It's not a directional assumption. It's just a market price level, a zone, where you need to watch your position and watch the market and how the market moves. You have to understand the momentum and the context around it. So if you are looking at the core resistance, it doesn't mean that the market rejects that price. It's not a technical resistance. And also it's not a put support. It's not a technical support. We call it a support because we wanted to have a name for the biggest negative red net GEX bar in here. That's why it's called put support. For HVL, we call the high volatility level is the level where the positive gamma zone swift changes to negative gamma profile. And this is called the high volatility level, because usually when the market flips and from positive GEX profile, the market flips to negative GEX profile, volatility tends to rise. That's why we call it the high volatility level. And the core transition and the put transition zones are the zones where the GEX levels are the same above or the same below. So there are different zones where you see interchangeably core net GEX and put net GEX. And above the core transition zone, you only see green bars, and below the put transition zone, you only see red bars. If we change the expiration to a different date, for example, the all expiry, you will see higher levels. You will see the core transition in here and the put support lower than before, because it accumulates or aggregates all the previous expiration data. If we go back to 0DT, for example, for today, the levels also change because we changed the expiration. Gamma and the other metrics are based on expirations, so it really depends on what kind of expirations or which expiration you select for your own specific trading methods. We also wrote a piece about this in a Medium article where I explain certain trading styles, which expirations are the best. If you are a day trader, it's obvious that you need to use the 0DT expiration. But for example, if you are a swing trader for stocks or ETFs, that would be also good to use the all expiry or every expiry, which aggregates all the previous options expiration data. So for example, if I were like a 0DT trader, which I am not, I would use the net volume as the first column. The net GEX cannot be changed. And here I would want to see the net OI or detailed OI. And here, for example, the absolute GEX for this expiration. But it really depends on the trader. We don't want to force any settings to any type of trader. That's why it's customizable. And you also have these kind of column presets where you can choose from. Now let's talk about the side panel a little bit. Here you see a couple of different infos. For example, the expiration in here, the net GEX value for that selected expiration, net DEX, data exposure, gamma exposure, and the daily change, 1 day change in terms of the GEX and in terms of the DEX. And we also named the gamma profiles. So for example, what you see in here is a positive gamma, which stands for the fact that the market price, the current market price, the white line, is above the HVL. When the HVL, the high volatility level, is lower than the current market price, we call it a positive gamma profile. So if the market is above this line, this is a positive gamma profile. If we are below that, this is a negative gamma profile. And if we are inside the zone, the put or call transition zone, that's where you will see neutral or transition zone. Here you also see the levels on the horizontal lines, like the CR, the core resistance, the put support, put transition, HVR, core transition, and the current market price. On the bottom of the panel, you will see the chain activity, which shows you different kind of metrics based on the option chain for that selected expiration. Here you can see if the volume is higher than the open interest for calls or puts, and The call volume and the call open interest is also compared to the put volume and put open interest. So these are metrics that you can track during the day in terms of the open interest and volume change from the underlying. But this is also important, not a directional signal. So if you see a very high call activity, it does not mean that the market will go up for 100% certainty. It just means that the market is trading more on the call side. But trading on the call side can also mean that traders are selling their calls or closing their call positions. Not only means that everybody is buying calls and the market will definitely go up. So this is not a bearish and this is not a bullish assumption in and of itself, because it only shows you the chain activity. But if you combine it with your own technical skills and analytical skills and how you make up your decision, it can help you, but this is not a directional signal. It's very important to understand that. These are metrics, these are current statistics based on the options chain itself. So let's say that, for example, we switch to Tesla. We see there was a higher call activity yesterday than put side. But for example, if we go to Baidu, just random stuff, the call activity was lower than for Tesla. Let's go to Palantir. The put side was very active, right? Because you see a put dominated action in terms of the volume and open interest. If you hover over these little buttons, it will explain what it means exactly. And you can also see the sliders in here. And if you watch these metrics during the day, you will understand how to use it. But again, not a directional indicator. It's not a signal. It's just statistics that can be derived from the actual option chain activity. Now let's go back to QQQ and 0DT. Here we see different levels, and you also see the metric. Yesterday, put activity was more dominant than call activity. So I guess these are the most important aspects of the GEX Live table. And if you want to customize the layout a little more, you can just minimize this header part here. If you want to see higher bars and numbers, you can also zoom in and zoom out from the table view, depending on your current screen resolution or your personal preference. If you want to change any of the expiration, you just click on the expiration and you will see the current table view based on the NetGEX and other option metrics. Here you can also see the date. This says 6th of March, 22 days to expiration. This is the 4th weekly. And this little bubble shows you the current market gamma profile. So this also tells you here that there is a negative gamma profile for this expiration. And get familiar with the colors in here because it's easier to understand if you know how to interpret them. So for example, if you click here, that's called positive transition because it's a blue one. And here you can see that we are above the HVL line, but still inside the core transition zone, because as you can tell here you can also see interchangeably call GEX and also put GEX, and we call it a transition zone, and above that you only see positive GEX values. So this is called transitioning when you see a blue label in here. If you click in here, it shows you negative transitioning, so almost the same color, but this is a positive, this is a negative one, because we are just below the HVL line, and the put transition zone is in here. That's because there are red bars and also a very, very tiny little one, which is a green one. That's why we call it a transition zone in here. If you want to see this one, for example, this green one, this obviously shows a positive gamma, because it's here positive gamma profile, and we are above the HVL line, and we are also above the call transition zone level, which cannot be seen exactly here because the current price label covers it. But you know that if you see these bubbles, you can immediately interpret the current or the gamma profile of that single expiration. So for example, you can see these 3 or 4 expirations are negative gamma profile. These are neutral ones, and these are positive ones. For example, let's go back to SPX and see how the profiles look like. Right now, all the profiles are positive GEX profile. Every single expiration is a positive GEX profile, no matter which one you look at. So this is a different market regime than in QQQ that we've seen previously. So once again, recap what we have talked about. This is a map. This is a positioning map. This is not a directional signal. So based on core resistance and put support, do not make any trading decision only purely looking at the core resistance and the put support. You have to understand that GEX is a map of volatility regimes and reaction zones. It has to be augmented with your own other analytical tools and trading practice or strategies. Gamma exposure and the other metrics tells you where you have to watch carefully the market and where are the zones where the market might react more heavily than usually. So these levels are really helpful for you if you manage a position and watch how the market reacts, and then you make your decision based on your current analysis and based on your trading strategy, but not only based on the put support or core resistance or any of these bars. These are reaction zones once again and not trading directional signals. So I think I have covered everything I wanted to talk about in the GEX Live Table View. And in the next video, we will talk about the GEX Live Chart View. If you have any questions about this video or any of the concepts covered in here, let me know. Thank you for your attention. Take care. Bye. Thanks for watching. If you haven't yet, please subscribe and check out our other videos. You can always find us at the links in the description. Trade safe out there.